It started like any other late-night drive. I was heading back from a long trip, tired but determined to push through. My playlist had run out, the battery on my phone was nearly dead, and the gas light on my dashboard was glowing a steady orange. I had no choice but to stop. When I finally spotted the gas station, it felt like a relief at first. It was one of those old, rundown places you see in the middle of nowhere, with peeling paint, a flickering neon sign, and not a soul in sight. It should have been comforting, but instead, it felt like I'd stumbled into a painting where everything was just wrong. The air was thick, and it felt colder here, somehow heavier. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Maybe it was just my nerves, or maybe it wasn't. What happened next? Well, let's just say it changed the way I see the world. If you stick with me to the end of this story, I promise, you won't just hear about what I saw, you'll feel it. You'll understand why I can't sleep without the lights on anymore. So, buckle up. Because the further I take you into this memory, the darker it gets. And trust me, you'll want to know what's out there when the sun goes down. Let me tell you how it all started. I stepped out of my car, the door creaking as I pushed it shut. The chill in the air hit me immediately, sharper than it had any right to be for the time of year. There was no wind, no sound, just an oppressive silence, like the world had forgotten this place existed. The gas pump was one of those old, clunky ones. No screens, no card readers, just a rusty lever and a faint smell of gasoline lingering in the air. As I lifted the nozzle, I noticed the fluorescent lights above me were buzzing, flickering in and out like they couldn't quite decide if they wanted to stay on. "All right," I muttered to myself, trying to keep calm. In and out, just get the gas and get back on the road. But even as I said it, the uneasy feeling in my chest was growing. I kept glancing over my shoulder. The woods surrounded the station on all sides, dark and endless, the kind of place where your imagination loves to run wild. I couldn't help but think of all the stories I'd heard. Missing hikers, strange noises, shadows moving where they shouldn't. I told myself it was just the tiredness playing tricks on me. But deep down, I wasn't so sure. And then I saw it. At first, it was just movement, a flash of something in the corner of my eye. I froze, my hand tightening on the nozzle as my heart pounded in my chest. I turned slowly, scanning the shadows beyond the pumps. There was nothing there, just the trees, the darkness, and the faint hum of the gas flowing into my tank. "Get a grip," I whispered, but my voice sounded hollow, even to me. Then came the sound. A low growl. So faint I wasn't sure if I'd actually heard it, or if my mind was filling in the blanks. But it wasn't human. It wasn't an animal I could recognize either. It was deep, guttural, almost like the engine of some massive machine revving up in the distance. That's when I knew. I wasn't alone. They were glowing. Not like the faint reflection you see in an animal's eyes at night, no. These were brighter, burning, like two embers floating in the darkness, watching me. And they were close, too close. I stood there, frozen, gas pump still in my hand. My brain screamed at me to move, to do anything, but my body refused. It was like being caught in a nightmare, where the harder you try to wake up, the deeper you sink. And then it stepped forward. The thing wasn't human, not even close. It moved on 4 limbs, but not in a way that made sense. Its joints seemed to bend wrong, its spine curving unnaturally as it slinked out of the shadows. Its skin was pale, stretched tight over a skeletal frame, with patches of something that looked like fur but didn't quite seem real. And those teeth, God, those teeth, jagged, too many for its mouth, bared in a snarl that sent a chill down my spine. It was like a predator savoring its prey, waiting to strike. I don't remember dropping the gas nozzle, but I must have. because suddenly my hands were empty, trembling at my sides. The creature tilted its head, almost curious, and let out a low, guttural growl. And then it lunged. The world exploded into chaos. I barely had time to dive out of the way as it slammed into the pump I'd been standing next to, the metal screeching under its weight. I scrambled backward, my palms scraping against the rough pavement, and for a split second, I thought I was done for. But then the creature stopped. It crouched there, its head snapping towards something in the distance. It sniffed the air, a sound so sharp and unnatural it made my stomach turn. And then it turned those burning eyes back on me. I didn't wait to see what it would do next. I was already on my feet, running toward the gas station store as fast as my legs could carry me. The door slammed behind me with a deafening crash, and I twisted the lock, my chest heaving. I pressed my back against the door, my eyes darting around the dimly lit store. Shelves of chips, soda, and random supplies filled the space, but there wasn't a soul in sight. I was alone. Or at least I thought I was. But you're going to want to hear what happened next. Because as terrifying as that thing outside was, what I found inside the store was so much worse. The store was small, cramped. The fluorescent lights inside flickered just like the ones outside, casting long, uneven shadows that seemed to move on their own. My breath was loud, ragged, and every time I exhaled, I thought I could hear something else breathing back. I scanned the room, every nerve on edge. The counter was empty, no attendant in sight. Just an old register, half covered in dust, and a bell that looked like it hadn't been rung in years. Behind it, a doorway led to what might have been a storage room, but I wasn't about to check. The walls were lined with the usual, rows of snacks, energy drinks, cheap flashlights, and car supplies. Nothing that screamed, "Pick this up if you want to survive." I edged toward the shelves, searching for anything I could use. A weapon, a phone, something. When I noticed something strange. The shelves at the back, the ones near the cold drinks section, were shattered. Glass everywhere. But it wasn't the kind of break you'd expect from a bottle falling or a careless stalker. It was smashed outward, like something had forced its way through. And then I saw the blood. It wasn't a lot, just small dark stains leading from the shattered shelf to the far corner of the store. The trail stopped near a rack of old magazines. I don't know why I followed it. Why I didn't just stay near the door and wait for that thing to move on. But I couldn't help myself. I crouched down near the rack, squinting at the floor. And that's when I saw it. A phone. An old one, cracked but still powered on, lying there like someone had dropped it in a hurry. "Finally," I whispered, reaching for it. My fingers barely brushed the screen when I heard it. A scrape. It came from the storage room behind the counter. Slow, deliberate, like something heavy being dragged across the floor. I froze. My hand hovered over the phone. Heart pounding in my chest. Another scrape. And then another. "Is someone there?" I called out, instantly regretting it. My voice cracked, loud enough to echo in the tiny store. I half hoped for a response, but all I got was silence, and then the door creaked open. I couldn't see much, just darkness spilling out into the dim light of the store. But I could feel it, that same cold presence from outside. It was here now. I grabbed the phone, clutching it like it was a lifeline, and backed away slowly. The door swung wider, and for a split second I thought I saw movement. A shadow. Something crawling low to the ground. I didn't wait to find out what it was. I turned and bolted, heading deeper into the store, the phone clutched tightly in my hand. I gripped the hammer like my life depended on it, because it did. The creature rounded the corner, moving faster now, its glowing eyes locked on me. There was no hesitation in the way it moved, no doubt it was here to kill. I swung the hammer wildly as it lunged, the force of the blow barely enough to knock it off course. It staggered, letting out a deafening screech that made my ears ring, but it wasn't down, not even close. It recovered quickly, faster than I thought possible, and lashed out with one of its long, clawed limbs. The blow caught my shoulder, sending me crashing into the counter. Pain shot through my body, but I couldn't stop. I scrambled to my feet, gasping, and bolted for the back of the store. There had to be a back door, a way out, anything to get me away from this thing. I could hear it behind me, the scraping of its claws against the tile, the heavy breathing as it closed the distance. The storage room door loomed ahead. I didn't want to go in there, not after what I'd seen, but it was my only option. I burst through the door, slamming it shut behind me and locking it with trembling hands. The room was dark, lit only by the faint glow of a single, flickering bulb. Boxes and crates were stacked haphazardly, casting long, jagged shadows. I searched frantically for something, anything I could use to defend myself. Then I saw it. In the corner of the room, half hidden under a tarp, was a red canister of gasoline. The creature's claws raked against the door, the wood splintering under the force. I knew I didn't have much time. Grabbing the canister, I began pouring a line of gasoline across the floor, leading back to the entrance. The door exploded inward, the creature charging in with a guttural roar. I lit a match, my hands shaking, and dropped it onto the gasoline. The flames roared to life, engulfing the creature. It shrieked, thrashing wildly, its glowing eyes dimming as the fire consumed it. I stumbled back, the heat unbearable, and watched as the thing collapsed into the flames. But then, as the fire began to die down, I heard it. Growls, not just one, dozen coming from outside. I ran to the back door, throwing it open, and froze. The woods were alive with movement, glowing eyes staring back at me from the shadows. The creatures were everywhere, closing in. There was no way out. And that's where my story ends. Or, at least the part I can tell you. The rest, well, that's for you to imagine. But here's the thing. I wasn't the first person to stop at that gas station. And I doubt I'll be the last. If you made it this far, thank you for sticking with me through the terror. And now I have a challenge for you. Think about your next late-night drive. When you see those glowing eyes in the shadows, will you stop or keep driving? It was supposed to be just another ordinary road trip with my family. We had been driving for hours, laughing, sharing snacks, and arguing over which playlist to play next. The kids were finally asleep in the back seat, and the highway stretched ahead, dark and endless. My wife reminded me to stop for gas before we got too far from a civilization, so when I saw the faint glow of a gas station sign in the distance, I took the exit without hesitation. It was the only one for miles. But something about the station felt off. Even from a distance, it didn't look like the usual roadside stop. The lights were dim, flickering sporadically, casting long, jagged shadows across the empty lot. The place seemed lifeless, like it had been abandoned for years. I brushed it off. We were low on fuel, and this wasn't the time to let my imagination run wild. Or so I thought. What happened next is something I'll never forget. By the time we left that gas station, we weren't the same family we were when we arrived. If you want to know why, stay with me until the end of this video. You won't believe what we experienced. As I pulled into the gas station, the crunch of gravel under the tires seemed unnaturally loud. The place was eerily quiet, too quiet. No other cars, no attendants, not even the hum of insects you'd expect on a summer night. Just silence. The air felt heavy, almost suffocating, and the faint buzz of a single flickering bulb above the pump didn't help. My wife shifted uneasily in her seat. "This place feels weird," she muttered, glancing around. I nodded, but tried to play it cool. "We'll be quick," I said, forcing a smile. "Just a few minutes and we'll be back on the road." The kids were still asleep, their soft breathing a comforting background noise. I got out of the car and immediately noticed how cold it was. A sharp chill that didn't match the warm summer night we had been driving through. I told myself it was just the open space or maybe nerves from the strange vibe of the station. The pump looked old, ancient really, the kind you'd expect to see in black and white photos from decades ago. I swiped my card, but the machine didn't respond. I tried again. Nothing. Then, out of nowhere, the pump beeped, and a raspy voice crackled through the speaker. "Please proceed." It sounded mechanical, but somehow off. I glanced around, but there was no one in sight. I waved it off as old equipment and started fueling. That's when my wife rolled down her window. "Do you see that?" she whispered, her voice trembling. I turned to follow her gaze, but at first I didn't see anything, just the empty road stretching out behind us. But the feeling in my chest told me something was there, watching. I squinted into the darkness, trying to see what had caught her attention. At first, there was nothing, just the dim glow of the gas station lights barely reaching the edge of the lot. But then, I saw it. A figure. Or at least, I thought it was a figure. It stood at the far end of the station, near what looked like an old boarded-up convenience store. It wasn't moving, just standing there, completely still, like it was part of the shadows themselves. "Maybe it's just a mannequin or something," I said, though my voice betrayed my doubt. My wife didn't respond. She just kept staring, her grip tightening on the edge of the car door. I tried to brush it off, telling myself we were just on edge because of how eerie the place felt. I glanced back toward the pump, willing the gas to finish faster. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw the figure move. It was subtle, a slight shift, like it had leaned forward or taken a step. My stomach dropped. I froze, my hand still gripping the nozzle, my mind racing. Was it a person? And if so, why weren't they saying anything? Why just stand there, watching? I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears as I turned back toward the car. "It's nothing," I muttered, more to myself than to my wife. But she wasn't convinced. "We need to go," she said, her voice firm but tinged with fear. Just then, the station lights flickered, plunging us into darkness for what felt like an eternity but was probably only a second or two. When they came back on, the figure was gone, or at least, it wasn't where it had been. I scanned the lot, my eyes darting from shadow to shadow, but there was no sign of it. My wife's voice broke the silence. "Get in the car, now." And for the first time in years, I didn't argue with her. I hurriedly replaced the nozzle and jumped back into the car, my heart racing. The gas pump beeped again, but I didn't care. We had enough fuel to get back on the highway, and that was all that mattered. As soon as I closed the door, I locked it. My wife was already staring out the window, scanning the shadows like her life depended on it. "Did you see where it went?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She shook her head, her face pale. "No, but I don't think it's gone." The engine roared to life as I turned the key. Relief washed over me for a split second, till we heard it. A noise, a sharp, deliberate knock, coming from the back of the car. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to send a chill down my spine. "Did you hear that?" my wife asked, her voice trembling. I nodded, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I glanced at the rearview mirror, but the back of the car was dark, the faint glow from the gas station barely illuminating the edges of the lot. Another knock. This time, it was on her side of the car, right near the back window. My wife gasped, spinning around to look, but there was nothing there. Just the emptiness of the lot and the flickering lights of the gas station. The kids were awake now, their sleepy faces filled with confusion and fear. "What's going on, Dad?" my son asked, his voice small. I forced a smile I didn't feel. "Nothing, buddy. Everything's fine." But everything wasn't fine. The air felt heavier, the silence more oppressive. And then, As if the night itself was toying with us, the car suddenly stalled. The engine sputtered and died, leaving us sitting in the dark, surrounded by nothing but shadows. My wife looked at me, her eyes wide with panic. "What's happening?" she asked, but I had no answers. My hands shook as I tried to restart the car. The engine groaned but refused to turn over. That's when we heard it again. Closer this time. A scraping sound, like nails dragging across metal, coming from the trunk. I wanted to get out and check, but every instinct in my body screamed at me to stay inside, to keep the doors locked. My wife grabbed my arm. "Don't," she whispered as if she could read my mind. "Whatever it is, it's still out there." And that's when the lights of the gas station flickered off completely, plunging us into absolute darkness. The darkness was suffocating. Without the gas station's dim lights, it felt like we were sitting in a void, surrounded by nothing but shadows, pressing in closer and closer. My breathing quickened, and I could hear my wife whispering softly to herself, maybe a prayer, or maybe just trying to calm her nerves. The kids sat frozen, their fear palpable in the silence. And then, the scratching on the trunk stopped. At first, it felt like a relief, but the silence that followed was somehow worse. I strained my ears, listening for any sign of movement, but all I could hear was the pounding of my heart. That's when I noticed it. A faint sound, barely audible, footsteps, slow and deliberate, circling the car. I glanced at my wife, her face barely visible in the darkness, and mouthed the words, "Stay quiet." She nodded, clutching the kids tightly. The footsteps stopped just outside my window and my blood ran cold. Whatever was out there was standing just inches away. And then, a face appeared. Not in the window, but in the rearview mirror, pale, distorted, and inhuman. Its hollow eyes stared straight at me, as if it could see into my soul. I froze, unable to move, my mind racing with disbelief. Was it real? Or was my imagination playing tricks on me? Before I could process what I was seeing, the face vanished, and the car began to shake violently. It felt like something, or someone, was pushing it from all sides. The kids screamed, and my wife grabbed my arm, shouting, "Do something!" I tried to start the car again, my hands trembling so badly I could barely hold the key. The engine roared to life, and the headlights flickered on, cutting through the darkness. For a brief moment I saw it. A figure, hunched and twisted, retreating into the shadows at an unnatural speed. Its movements were jerky, almost like it was glitching out of existence. Without thinking, I slammed my foot on the gas. The tires screeched as the car lurched forward, and we sped out of the gas station, leaving whatever that thing was behind. My wife was crying, the kids were sobbing, and my heart felt like it might burst out of my chest. But we were alive, and that was all that mattered. As we reached the highway, I risked one last glance in the rearview mirror. The gas station was just a speck in the distance now, but I could swear I saw it. That same pale, distorted face watching us from the darkness, waiting for its next victim. The highway never felt so welcoming. The bright lines on the asphalt and the faint glow of distant lights were a relief after what we had just endured. But even as we sped away, the tension in the car was thick, unrelenting. My wife clutched the kids tightly, whispering reassurances that neither of us fully believed. My hands were locked on the steering wheel, and I couldn't bring myself to look in the mirrors again. No one spoke for a while. The only sounds were the engine and our shaky breathing. It was as if words would somehow summon that thing back, whatever it was. Finally, my wife broke the silence. "What was that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't have an answer. How could I? It wasn't human, that much I was sure of. But beyond that, I couldn't explain it. "I don't know," I said finally, my voice hoarse, "but we're not stopping again. Not until we're home." The kids had calmed down a little, though they still held on to my wife as if letting go would bring the nightmare back. "Dad," my son said quietly, "was it a monster?" I hesitated. What could I say to him? That monsters weren't real? After what we'd just seen, even I didn't believe that anymore. "I don't know, buddy," I said, glancing at him in the rearview mirror. "But it's gone now. And we're safe. At least, I wanted to believe we were safe. But the further we drove, the heavier the air seemed to get. My mind replayed the face I'd seen in the mirror, the way it had vanished like smoke, and the inhuman movements of that figure. It didn't feel real, but it had been. Too real. Hours later, we finally pulled into our driveway. The familiar sight of our house should have brought relief, but instead it felt hollow. None of us wanted to get out of the car. "We're home," I said, though the words felt meaningless. Slowly, we stepped out, staying close together as if the darkness could still reach us here. That night, no one slept. Every creak, every gust of wind outside made us jump. The kids refused to stay in their room, and we didn't force them. My wife and I stayed awake, replaying every moment, trying to make sense of it. But there was no sense to be found. The next day, we decided to tell no one. Who would believe us? It sounded ridiculous, even to our own ears. An ordinary stop at a gas station that turned into whatever that was. We avoided that route from then on, and any time we needed to refuel at night, we drove miles out of our way to find a crowded, well-lit station. But here's the thing. Even now, years later, it hasn't left me. Sometimes when I'm driving late at night, I'll feel it. That same coldness, that same heavy silence. And every now and then, I catch myself glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see that face staring back at me. If you've ever experienced something you can't explain, something that still haunts you, let me know in the comments. Maybe we're not as alone in this as we think. I thought this job would be a breeze. What could go wrong working the late-night shift at a gas station? Just me, the hum of vending machines, and a few sleepy drivers stopping for gas. The idea of being alone all night in a quiet place even sounded kind of peaceful. But let me tell you, that night wasn't peaceful. Not even close. My name's Ryan, and I'm the kind of guy who doesn't scare easily. I like to think I can handle myself. Seen enough movies to know how not to trip over my own feet when things get dicey. But I'll admit, what happened during that shift still keeps me up at night. And I'm not just talking about the occasional nightmare. I'm talking about moments when I swear I feel eyes on me, even when I'm alone. The gas station where I worked wasn't much to look at. Just a little shack with a register, a couple of aisles of snacks, and a storage room in the back. Outside, there were 4 pumps, a flickering canopy light, and not much else. Just a long, empty road stretching out into nothingness. It's one of those places you drive past and think, who even works out here? Well, that night it was me. It started off normal, quiet, almost boring. A car here, a customer there, the usual stuff. I'd scroll on my phone between helping people, keeping one eye on the clock and the other on the security monitors. But then, little things started to feel off. Nothing major, just enough to put a weight in my chest. The flickering light outside seemed slower than usual, almost deliberate. One of the cameras would glitch for a second, showing static, then snap back like nothing happened. I remember thinking, maybe I'm just tired. But then there was this noise. Faint tapping on the glass. I glanced at the door, but no one was there. It could have been the wind, sure, but something about it felt different. Off. Like someone, or something, wanted me to know I wasn't alone. Now, I know you're probably curious, and I promise this story gets crazier from here. There's more than just noises and flickering lights. By the time we're done, you'll understand why I don't take the graveyard shift anymore, and why you shouldn't either. Stick with me until the end, and I'll tell you what really happened. Not just the stuff I heard or saw, but what I found that night. Something I wouldn't believe myself if I didn't have to live through it. Trust me, you're not going to want to miss this. Things started to get weird around 1 a.m. That's when he came in. The man didn't look particularly threatening at first, just your typical late-night customer. He was tall and thin, wearing a dark jacket and jeans. His face was pale, almost sickly, like he hadn't slept in days. He walked in slowly, his boots making a dull thud on the tile floor, and headed straight for the coffee machine without saying a word. I watched him out of the corner of my eye as he poured a cup, then just stood there for what felt like way too long, staring into the coffee like it had all the answers to life. Finally, he came to the counter. "Busy night?" he asked, his voice low and raspy. "Not really," I replied, trying to keep it casual. "It's pretty quiet out here this time of night." He smiled, but it wasn't a normal smile. It didn't reach his eyes. "Quiet," he repeated, like he was tasting the word. Then he asked the first question that made my stomach drop. "You here all alone?" Now, I've seen enough creepy movies to know that's not a normal question. Most people ask about the coffee, the price of gas, maybe directions, but it felt off. I didn't want to lie, but I also didn't want to say, "Yeah, I'm all alone out here," so I shrugged and said, "Not really. We've got people who come by and check on things." He didn't react, just nodded like he knew I was lying. He placed a crumpled dollar bill on the counter, picked up his coffee, and said, "Take care of yourself, man. It's a strange world out there." Then he left. I watched as he walked outside, but instead of heading to his car, he just stood near the pumps, sipping his coffee. Not doing anything, not looking at anything, just standing there. I glanced at the security cameras, hoping they'd give me a better view, but they glitched again, showing static for a second before coming back on. When they did, the man was gone. The rest of the night was quiet. For about 15 minutes, that's when I heard it again, a faint tapping, this time on the glass door. My stomach tightened. I looked up, expecting to see the man standing there, but there was no one. Just the empty parking lot and the dim glow of the canopy light outside. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe a tree branch or a bird, something harmless. But deep down, I felt it. That gnawing sense that I wasn't alone. And that was just the beginning. The tapping stopped, but my nerves didn't. I tried to shake it off, busying myself with small tasks, restocking shelves, wiping down the counter, anything to keep my mind occupied. But it didn't help. Every little sound, the hum of the fridge, the buzz of the lights, felt amplified, like the station itself was alive and watching me. Then the phone rang. Now, at that hour, the phone doesn't ring unless there's an emergency. Most of the time, it's the manager checking in or a driver calling to ask for directions. But when I picked up, all I got was static. "Hello?" I said, my voice unsteady. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, through the crackling static, I heard a voice. Distorted, low, and barely audible. "Don't go outside." The line went dead. I stared at the phone, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. My first instinct was to think it was a prank, someone messing with me. But who would go out of their way to call a gas station in the middle of nowhere at this hour? And how did they know I was even thinking about stepping outside? I put the phone down and glanced at the security monitors. The screen flickered again, showing static for a second before returning to normal. Everything looked fine. Empty parking lot, empty pumps, empty store. Still, the unease in my gut was growing stronger. And then the lights went out. It wasn't a slow flicker or a power surge. It was like someone had pulled the plug. 1 second, the station was fully lit. The next, it was pitch black, save for the faint glow of the emergency lights by the exits. My hand darted to my pocket for my phone. I turned on the flashlight and shone it around the room. The shelves cast long, menacing shadows that seemed to move just out of the corner of my eye. I took a step toward the back office, hoping to find the circuit breaker, when I heard it. A faint but unmistakable sound. Breathing. It was slow and heavy, coming from somewhere in the store. I froze, my flashlight trembling in my hand as I scanned the room. Nothing. Just rows of snacks and drinks, the same as always. But the breathing didn't stop. It was closer now. It was right behind me. I spun around, but there was no one there. The monitors flickered back on. At first, all I saw was static, but then the image sharpened. My breath caught in my throat. On the screen, one of the pumps was showing movement. The strange man from earlier was back, standing completely still beneath the canopy, staring straight at the camera, and he was smiling. I couldn't move. My eyes were glued to the monitor. He wasn't doing anything, just standing there, smiling that eerie, lifeless smile. But something about him felt wrong. It was like watching a statue come to life. Something unnatural about the way he stood so still, yet so present, like he was waiting for something. My heart raced as I forced myself to look away from the screen. I glanced toward the glass doors, but from where I stood, I couldn't see the pumps clearly. My phone buzzed in my pocket, jolting me out of my frozen state. I fumbled to pull it out, desperate for some connection to the outside world. But the screen showed an unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. "Hello?" There was no static this time, just silence. For a few seconds, I thought maybe the call had dropped. Then I heard his voice again, clear as day. "Come outside." I hung up, my hands trembling. This wasn't a prank anymore. Whoever, or whatever, this man was, he wanted me to step out into the darkness. And I wasn't about to give him the satisfaction. But then, I heard the door chime. The automatic glass doors slid open with a soft whoosh, and a cold gust of air blew in. My heart dropped as I stared, frozen, waiting for him to step inside. But no one came in. The doors just stood open, inviting. I grabbed the metal flashlight from under the counter and took a shaky step forward. "Hello?" I called, my voice barely above a whisper. There was no answer. I edged closer to the door, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the darkness outside. The pumps were empty now. He was gone, but something inside me knew better. I backed away slowly, never turning my eyes from the door. I reached for the control panel behind the counter and hit the button to lock the doors. The glass slid shut with a soft click. That's when I heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate, heavy footsteps. Inside the store. I spun around, my flashlight darting through the aisles. For a second, I thought maybe I'd imagined it, but then I saw him, standing at the far end of the store, between the shelves of chips and bottled water, was the man. How? The word caught in my throat. The doors were locked. He couldn't have gotten in. But he was there, his head cocked slightly to the side, as if studying me. "You shouldn't have locked the door," he said softly, almost amused. I gripped the flashlight tighter, backing away toward the counter. "What do you want?" His smile widened. "You!" Before I could react, the lights flickered violently, plunging the room into strobing darkness. When they came back on, he was gone. The lights stopped flickering, leaving the store in a dim, uneasy stillness. My breaths were shallow, my grip on the flashlight so tight my knuckles ached. I scanned the room, my pulse thundering in my ears, but there was no sign of him. And yet, I felt it. Like the air itself was heavier, pressing down on me. He was still here. I knew it. I grabbed my phone and bolted toward the back office, slamming the door shut behind me. My hands shook as I dialed 911. The ringing felt endless. Finally, a calm voice answered. 911? What's your emergency? There's someone in the gas station, I whispered, trying to keep my voice steady. He's inside and... The line crackled, and I heard a faint, familiar voice. "Don't go outside." I froze. The call cut off. I stared at the phone, my stomach sinking. The signal bar was gone. No service. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and that's when I heard it again. Breathing, slow, deliberate, and impossibly close. I turned, and there he was, standing in the doorway, his eyes fixed on me, his smile wider than before. "Running won't help," he said, his voice unnervingly calm. I didn't think. I just reacted. I swung the flashlight as hard as I could, but it passed through him like smoke. He didn't move, didn't flinch, just stared. Panicking, I darted past him, yanking the office door open and sprinting toward the front of the store. My car keys were in my pocket. If I could just make it to the car. The automatic doors slid open as I approached, but as soon as I stepped outside, the air changed. The world felt wrong. The faint hum of insects and the distant sound of wind were gone. It was silent, unnaturally so. I fumbled with my keys, glancing back at the store. The lights inside were flickering again, but the man wasn't there. At least, I didn't see him. My car wouldn't start. I turned the key again and again, but all I got was a weak clicking sound. That's when I saw him. Standing at the edge of the parking lot, his figure silhouetted against the dim glow of the canopy lights. He didn't move, didn't approach. He just waited. The weight of his gaze was unbearable. I threw the car into neutral and started pushing it, desperate to get away. The entire time, I kept looking over my shoulder, but every time I glanced back, he was closer. Not walking, not running, just appearing. Each time a little nearer than before. Finally, the car rolled far enough that I could jump back in and try again. The engine sputtered to life, and I slammed on the gas, speeding down the dark, empty road without looking back. When I got home, I locked every door and window, sat on the floor, and waited for morning. I quit the job the next day. But even now, weeks later, I don't feel safe. Sometimes when I'm driving at night, I catch glimpses of him in my rearview mirror. Other times, I hear that faint tapping on my window. I tell myself it's my imagination, but deep down, I know the truth. You see, I left that gas station, but I don't think he ever left me. If you enjoyed this story, hit the like button to let me know. I'll never forget that night. It was late, sometime past midnight, and I was driving home after a long day. The kind of day where all you want is to get home, throw yourself into bed, and forget the world exists. I wasn't planning to stop, but my fuel gauge had other ideas. The gas station wasn't far, just a couple of miles down a quiet, deserted road. Nothing unusual, at least that's what I thought at the time. Let me introduce myself. My name's Adam, and if there's one thing you should know about me, it's that I don't believe in ghosts. At least, I didn't. I'm the guy who rolls his eyes at horror movies and laughs at scary stories. But that night was different. When I pulled into the station, I barely noticed how empty it was. No cars, no people, just me and the cold glow of the flickering neon sign. I thought about how peaceful it felt, but there was this tiny prickle at the back of my neck. That feeling, like someone's watching you? I shrugged it off. After all, it's just a gas station, right? If you've ever wondered what it feels like to encounter something you can't explain, something that sends chills down your spine and makes you question reality, you'll want to stick around. By the end of this video, I'll tell you exactly what happened and why I'll never step foot at that station again. Trust me, you won't see this coming. Ready to hear the rest? Let's dive in. The place was unsettling, though I didn't notice it at first. It was one of those tiny, out-of-the-way gas stations, the kind you only stop at when you're desperate. The overhead lights buzzed faintly, casting this dull, yellowish glow over the pumps. A neon open sign hung in the window of the convenience store, but it flickered every few seconds, like it was struggling to stay alive. The road was dead silent. No cars, no distant hum of an engine, just me, my car, and the faint rustling of the wind. The air felt thick, heavier than it should have been, like a storm was about to break, even though the sky was clear. I didn't think much of it. I was tired and figured my mind was playing tricks on me. I got out of the car, the gravel crunching under my boots, and glanced around. It struck me then, there was no one inside the store. No clerk, no movement, nothing. That should have been the first red flag, but I brushed it off. Maybe they were in the back room or taking a break. People do that, right? Still, something felt off. The shadows cast by the flickering light seemed to move more than they should, shifting along the edges of my vision. I kept telling myself I was imagining it. It's late, I'm tired, it's just my brain being weird. But then, out of nowhere, the air turned cold. Freezing cold, like someone flipped a switch. I stopped pumping gas and looked around, shivering even though I had my jacket on. That's when I realized I wasn't alone. What happened next? Let's just say it still keeps me up at night. Stay with me. It only gets stranger from here. I tried to ignore the chill in the air and focus on filling up the tank. I kept telling myself it was nothing, just a cold draft, maybe a drop in temperature, but the feeling wouldn't go away. It wasn't just cold, it was unnerving. The kind of cold that seeps into your bones and makes you feel watched. As the pump clicked off, signaling the tank was full, I heard it, faint at first, almost like a whisper carried on the wind. It was too soft to make out any words, but it didn't sound natural. It was low, raspy, and seemed to come from behind me. I froze for a second, my hand still gripping the nozzle. I turned my head slowly, scanning the area. Nothing. Just the empty parking lot and the dark outline of the convenience store. But the sound, it was there. I could feel it, like it was brushing past my ear. My mind started racing. Could it be the wind? Maybe an old ventilation system in the store. That had to be it. But then I noticed something that made my stomach drop. One of the lights above the pump started flickering erratically, buzzing louder than before. I tried to ignore it, but out of the corner of my eye, I saw a shadow. It was quick, darting across the edge of the lot, right near the dumpster. I whipped my head around, but there was nothing there. My heart started pounding. I told myself to calm down, that it was probably just a stray animal. Maybe a raccoon, but deep down I knew it wasn't. Something was wrong, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. And then, the whispering started again. Only this time, it was closer. The whispers grew louder. They weren't coming from behind me anymore. They were all around me, circling like they had a life of their own. My breathing quickened, and my hand instinctively reached for the car door handle. I wanted to get out of there, but I couldn't bring myself to move. That's when I saw it. At first, it was just a shape, barely visible in the dim light. It was standing near the far end of the gas station, right by the store's entrance. I blinked, thinking maybe I was imagining it, but it didn't go away. It was there. A figure, tall and still, shrouded in the shadows. I tried to focus, squinting to make out more details, but something about it was wrong. It wasn't just standing there, it was watching me. I could feel its gaze, cold and unrelenting, even though I couldn't see its eyes. My mind raced with explanations. Maybe it was someone waiting for a ride, a prankster trying to scare me, but deep down, I knew this wasn't something normal. Then, it moved. Not like a person walking, but more like a flicker. There one moment and closer the next, as if the space between us had disappeared in an instant. My stomach dropped, and every nerve in my body screamed at me to run, but I couldn't. My legs felt like they were glued to the ground. The figure stopped just outside the circle of light from the pump. close enough that I could make its outline. A long, tattered coat, and what looked like a hat pulled low over its face. The whispers had stopped now, replaced by a deafening silence. And then, as if it knew I was frozen in fear, it tilted its head. Slowly, deliberately, like it was curious. That was the moment I realized. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't human. My instincts screamed at me to get into the car and drive, but my body refused to listen. I was locked in place, my eyes fixed on the figure. It didn't move closer, but it didn't back away either. It just stood there, like it was waiting for me to do something. I finally managed to take a shaky step toward the car, but the moment I moved, the lights above the pumps flickered violently. One by one, they went out, plunging the entire station into darkness. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. In the blackness, I could still see the figure, not clearly, but as a faint outline, standing perfectly still. Then, out of the silence came a sound I'll never forget. A low, guttural groan, like a mix between a growl and a human moan. It reverberated through the air, sending chills down my spine. The figure shifted slightly, stepping just into the faint light coming from my car's headlights. For the first time, I could see its face, or what should have been a face. There was nothing there, just a void. No eyes, no mouth, no features at all. A hollow blackness stared back at me, more terrifying than any expression could have been. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over my own feet. My mind raced. Should I yell? Run? But something inside me knew neither would work. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't bound by the rules of the living. It tilted its head again, the same slow, deliberate motion, as if it was studying me. Then it raised one arm, pointing directly at me. I don't know why, but that gesture was worse than anything else. It felt like a warning, like it was telling me I'd made a mistake by stopping here. My fight-or-flight instincts finally kicked in, and I turned, fumbling for the car door handle. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely grip it. Just as I yanked the door open, I heard a loud thud behind me, like something heavy had slammed against the ground. Against my better judgment, I glanced over my shoulder. The figure was gone, but in its place the shadows seemed alive, twisting and writhing unnaturally near the edge of the lot. The whispers returned, louder and more chaotic than before, like dozens of voices overlapping in a sinister chorus. It felt like the air itself was pressing down on me, making it harder to breathe. I jumped into the car and slammed the door shut. My fingers fumbled over the ignition as I tried to start the engine. It sputtered, refusing to turn over. The lights on the dashboard flickered, and for a brief moment I thought I saw the figure standing in the rearview mirror just behind the car. A cold sweat broke out across my forehead. I slammed my hand against the steering wheel, silently begging the car to start. The whispers were now deafening, filling the entire car with their eerie presence. Finally, the engine roared to life, and I didn't waste a second. Throwing the car into gear, I hit the gas, speeding out of the station. As I pulled onto the road, I couldn't help but glance in the rearview mirror one last time. The station was still there, dark and silent, but the figure wasn't, or at least I didn't see it. But just as I exhaled in relief, the faintest whisper echoed from the back seat. "You shouldn't have stopped." I didn't stop driving until I reached home, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly they ached. Even as I parked in my driveway, the car idling softly, I couldn't bring myself to get out. My mind replayed every moment, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Had I imagined it all? Was I just overtired, my mind playing tricks on me? That's what I kept telling myself, but no matter how many times I tried to rationalize it, I couldn't shake the feeling that what I'd experienced was real. I never went back to that gas station. In fact, I avoid that entire stretch of road whenever I can. But sometimes, late at night, when the world is quiet, I hear it again, that whisper, soft, faint, like it's just outside my window. And every time I wonder, did it stay at the station or did it follow me home? What would you do if it happened to you? Let me know in the comments. I've always thought gas stations at night had an eerie vibe, but I never expected one to change my life forever. What started as a routine stop turned into one of the most terrifying experiences of my life. It was close to midnight, and the highway was completely silent. I was driving back home after visiting my parents, and my gas tank was almost empty. I didn't have a choice. I had to stop. When I saw the gas station up ahead, I felt a strange sense of relief, but it was short-lived. The place looked off. It was dimly lit, with one of the neon signs flickering so erratically it almost gave me a headache. The station was the only sign of life for miles, but it felt dead, too quiet, like something was holding its breath, waiting. I brushed it off as my mind playing tricks on me. It was late, and I was tired. I pulled into the lot, and the first thing I noticed was a car parked near the edge of the lot. Its headlights were on, but I couldn't see anyone inside. As I stepped out to pump gas, I realized how silent everything was. No crickets, no wind, just the hum of the gas pump. It was unsettling, but I tried to focus. While I was filling up, I felt it. A presence, like someone was watching me. I turned my head sharply, scanning the lot. There was no one there, or at least no one I could see. After finishing up, I decided to head inside the convenience store to pay. As I walked, I felt eyes on me again. I glanced over my shoulder and nearly froze. Someone was standing near the pumps, half hidden in the shadows. I couldn't see their face, but they were staring directly at me. My stomach twisted, and I quickened my pace into the store. When I came out, the figure was gone. The car with the headlights was gone too. For a moment, I felt relieved. Maybe I had imagined it. But that relief didn't last. When I got back to my car, my heart dropped. There was a bloody handprint on the driver's side window. I froze, staring at the handprint. It was smeared, like someone had pressed their hand against the glass and dragged it down. I whipped my head around, scanning the area. The lot was completely empty. The silence was deafening. My instincts kicked in. I yanked open the door, jumped into the driver's seat, and locked the doors. My hands were shaking as I jammed the key into the ignition. Just as the engine roared to life, I saw a movement in my rearview mirror. No, something was running towards me from the shadows. Its face was obscured, but its movements were jerky, unnatural, like it didn't belong in this world. I floored tires screeching as I sped out of the lot. My heart was pounding so loudly, it felt like it was echoing inside the car. I didn't stop, not for miles. My eyes kept darting to the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something chasing me down the highway. But there was nothing. When I finally reached a crowded rest area, I pulled over. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely get my seatbelt off. I sat there for what felt like hours, trying to calm down, but the fear wouldn't let go. To this day, I don't know what happened at that gas station, who or what was watching me, and why did they leave that bloody handprint on my car? I've told myself it was just some prank or maybe a strange coincidence, but deep down, I know the truth. Whatever was there that night wasn't human, and the thought of it still keeps me awake. So, if you're ever driving late at night and your tank is running low, think twice before stopping at an empty gas station. Some places aren't meant for us to visit.